Can a team that has been surpassed in classification for more than 0.6 of a second really have hope to fight for the podium on Sunday? Is Hamilton selling smoke? Or Ferrari has found something we are not seeing? Saturday's qualifying session was a reality bath. With a time of 1 minute, 11 seconds and 526 thousandths, Hamilton placed 5th on the grid, a position that could sound competitive, until the context is analyzed. The pole position of George Russell was more than 0.6 faster, a difference that in modern Formula One is equivalent to being on another technical planet. More than the position, the alarming was the rhythm deficit on a return. And most worrying, Hamilton had squeezed everything that the SF-25 could offer. Ferrari's car showed a clear tendency to subviring in the second and third sector, where low-speed curves require surgical precision in the delivery of power and rear stability. Hamilton had to fight to maintain the balance of the car in the traction areas, wasting time in each small correction. Meanwhile, McLaren and Mercedes seemed more planted in the asphalt, with cars that allowed their pilots to attack pianos without fear of sudden survival. But it wasn't just a Lewis problem. Charles Leclerc, his partner, did not even have the opportunity to prepare properly. In the FP1, the Monegasco suffered an accident in Curve 3 that destroyed its chassis. The impact against the wall was so severe that the SF-25 was unusable for the rest of the day, forcing Ferrari to make a complete change of chassis. The regulations of the FIA, relentless in terms of structural changes, prevented Leclerc from participating in the FP2. This left the team without crucial data to configure the car, especially in a circuit where each fine adjustment makes the difference between a disappointing Q2 and a surprising pole. In a sport where data simulation, software evolution, and predictive analysis are essential, losing a complete practice session is a tactical catastrophe. And not only because of the lack of filming, but because it forces to extrapolate data from a single car that of Hamilton that in turn already showed erratic behaviors. Ferrari remained blind, improvising at the last minute on an unstable technical basis. It is in that scenario where Hamilton achieves his P5. And that position, which in paper may seem decent, actually reflects how far Ferrari is of the true contenders to the title. Because if a pilot like Hamilton, with all his talent and experience, he can barely approach half the leader, it means that the car is failing in key design areas. Weight distribution, torque delivery, aerodynamic efficiency, and rear train response in slow curves. So it is not a simple bad classification. It is the confirmation of a dangerous trend for Ferrari. An unpredictable car, poorly balanced and without significant technical evolution. The classification in Montreal is not an anomaly, it is a symptom of something deeper. And in the context of an increasingly tight championship, every 10th lost on Saturday is a battle uphill on Sunday. After the classification of Saturday, the cameras focused on a Lewis Hamilton who, although he maintained the usual composure of a veteran, could not hide his disappointment. In front of the microphones, the British pilot was honest, even more than Ferrari would have wanted. His statements were not those of someone defeated, but neither did a pilot with blind confidence in the project. He said, without ornaments, that it was not a particularly good day, and that the car was very different from what I have experienced here in the past. It was not a free critic. It was a clear description of a car that does not respond to his hands as the previous champions he has competed with. In Montreal, Hamilton not only faced the circuit, he also battled against the technical uncertainty of a car that seems to hide structural problems behind his aerodynamic facade. And that is precisely the most revealing point of his words. Because when a Hamilton-caliber pilot with more than a decade in the elite admits that it will be a challenge to enter Q3 at this rate, he is not making a generic comment. He is sending a coded message to the team, a call for attention. But the accumulated tension is not born exclusively from what happened in Canada. It has been crawling from previous weeks, and it exploded in a revelation that went almost unnoticed by the media, but that marks a breakpoint within Ferrari. Hamilton confessed that after the GP of Spain, they discovered with Charles Leclerc that both cars carried several races with a technical problem that was hindering them massively. The fact that this information has remained a secret by order of the team, even after multiple complaints by radio, calls into question the Ferrari's internal communication system. It is more than a technical issue. It is a trusted wound. Hamilton had reported negative sensations from cockpit, qualifying the experience as the worst feeling that the car had ever had. That phrase, pronounced with despair in the heat of the race, was ignored at the time. Only later it was confirmed that his perceptions were correct. This lack of immediate validation generates a dangerous disconnection between pilot and engineers, one that can undermine morality, even of the most experienced competitor. At this point, What is at stake is not only the performance of the SF-25, it is the credibility of the Ferrari system. How can a team aspire to the championship if their own pilots are not heard when they detect critical failures on track? The modern Formula One is a dance of thousandths of a second between machine and man. When one of those two elements stops trusting the other, all balance collapses. The most ironic and at the same time dramatic is that it was that same institutional silence that drove Hamilton to raise his voice in Canada. His mixture of relief and frustration confirming that I was not crazy, that there was effectively a hidden technical problem, it reflects a deeper emotional fracture than it seems. And although he tried to clarify his speech with a message of unity, the damage was already done. Broken trust is not rebuilt with communications. In this emotional context, Ferrari faces an existential dilemma. They have a star pilot who asks for answers, a teammate who drags his own mistakes, and a car that seems stagnant in a beta version of what it promised to be. It's not just a bad streak, it is a turning point. And if it is not managed with intelligence and transparency, it can be the beginning of an irreversible disenchantment between Hamilton and the most legendary team of motoring. The Canada 2025 Grand Prix not only exposed the limits of SF-25 on a return, he also put the true Ferrari Achilles heel under the microscope at this stage of the season. His little technical evolution. The total absence of updates in Montreal was more than a logistics decision. It was an involuntary statement of strategic resignation. While McLaren and Mercedes continue to introduce aerodynamic improvements in almost every Grand Prix, Ferrari chose not to implement any change in one of the most sensitive circuits to aerodynamic balance and braking efficiency. The only visible alteration was the reuse of the rear spoiler in V-shape, a component already used in the previous rounds without conclusive results. This design, designed to reduce the resistance to advance in long lines such as the Casino and facilitate faster peak speed, does not compensate for the instability that the car shows in traction. This technical contradiction explains why Ferrari can show speed in the high-speed sectors, but loses return consistency in race conditions, especially when tire temperature management comes into play. However, this is where the paradox that feeds Hamilton's optimism arises. In Friday's race simulations and the longest stints on Saturday, SF-25 showed surprisingly competitive performance. Although not at the level of McLaren that remains the reference in consistency and degradation, the rhythm was enough to put Ferrari in a position of potential threat and strategy, especially if the wear and tear of tires and changing conditions enter the scene. During the simulations of long batches in the second sector, the SF-25 managed to maintain more stable times than the Red Bull, which continued to show a significant performance drop as the track temperature increases. This indicates that, although the Italian car is not particularly fast in a launched return, its load distribution and refrigeration capacity are stable enough to allow you to better manage the average compounds, even with little fuel load. This reading is not less. In a circuit such as Montreal, where the strategic margin can be opened by events such as security cars or intermittent rain, having a car that is maintained within a constant rhythm, without peaks of abrupt degradation, it can be the difference between an anodyne race and an unexpected podium. And it is precisely what holds Hamilton's speech. It is not about throwing a smoke curtain or make up an adverse reality. It is the vision of a pilot who has competed on the top for more than 15 years and recognizes that the key is not alone on Saturdays. He knows that the ability to execute a flexible strategy, to conserve tires when others fall in times, can give dividends if the opportunity occurs. However, that margin of hope is strongly conditioned by the perfect execution of all the elements that surround a career: boxes, decisions, real-time communication, reading the data in dynamic conditions. And that is where Ferrari has historically failed. Having a decent rhythm in long batches is just part of the puzzle. The other, perhaps more crucial, is the ability to translate that data into bold but precise decisions. In other words, having the knife is useless if you don't know when to cut. And then we arrive at the question that many ask themselves after listening to Lewis Hamilton's statements at the end of Saturday in Canada: are there really reasons to believe? Are there tangible foundations behind that measured optimism, or is it simply a forced attitude to avoid fracturing even more fragile confidence between pilot and equipment? The truth is that there are reasons, but they are not enough for themselves. What Hamilton has in hand is not a disastrous car, but neither with complete tools to fight for victories. SF-25 has shown that it can be moderately competitive in career conditions, especially in terms of prolonged rhythms and temperature management in intermediate compounds. But that performance is conditional, fragile, dependent on a cluster of external factors that are rarely aligned in Formula One: clean strategies, absence of errors, favorable climatic conditions, and, above all, an impeccable execution of the equipment in real time? And that is where the biggest problem is. Because Ferrari, despite having progressed with respect to previous years, has not yet proven to be a team that can navigate a complex career. Communication with its pilots has been erratic, strategic decision-making remains conservative at times where boldness is needed, and the technical direction seems to react more to anticipate. Lewis Hamilton knows it. It is not naive. This has lived before. What makes it different this time is that it no longer has the structure of Mercedes behind, the one that for years shielded it with a surgical precision machinery. It is now in a more volatile environment, more prone to make human and technical mistakes. His optimism then is not a sign of blind trust, but of necessity. He needs to believe that there is a correct direction, because the opposite of thinking that everything is lost would be to admit that his commitment to Ferrari was a mistake. And for a champion like him, accepting failure without giving the complete fight is simply unacceptable. The closure of this day in Montreal is not a sentence for Ferrari or Hamilton. It is a warning. A reminder that the pilot's talent cannot eternally compensate for the structural deficiencies of a team.